choosing sides. He asked me if I'm trying to cause division in the church. It's not about choosing sides here. No. So don't worry about that, church. It's all right. There's a story that I'm almost sure I told you before. If I have, please bear with me as you hear it again. It's the first time you hear it again. There was a story of a farmer who found himself with a problem. He had a dilemma. On his farm there were some snakes, and he was trying to get rid of these snakes. And to do that, there's another animal. If you're having a problem with snakes, the best animal to get rid of snakes is a mongoose. A mongoose, right? So he wanted to get rid of the snakes, so he wrote a letter to the Department of Agriculture and said, "Dear manager or director of the Department of Agriculture, I'd like you to send me 2 mongoose." But then he said, "That doesn't sound right." He scratched it out. And he started again, "Dear director of agriculture, I'd like you to send me 2 mongooses." But then that didn't sound right either, and he scratched it out too. And then he was like, "What should I say? I don't know." So then he finally decided, "Dear director of agriculture, I'd like you to send me 1 mongoose. And while you're at it, please send me another mongoose." So his problem was solved. I think the correct thing is mongooses. I think. Mongooses, not mongoose. Now, that story has nothing to do with my presentation today. But I told it just to wake you up and get you interested in me standing here. I'm not a very interesting guy. Stories are used for that purpose, to get people interested, to get them, alert. In the Bible, Jesus told many stories, many parables. Some of them were true, some of them were fiction, some of them are part true and part fiction. One story involved a rich man and a poor man. At school we used to play a game called Rich Man, Poor Man. You know that game? Rich Man, Poor Man, something like that. I don't remember it very well either. But, yeah. And there are songs like that that we would sing as kids. Rich Man, Poor Man. No, yes. A beggar man, thief, yes. Sorry. Rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief, lawyer, doctor, Indian chief. Whoa. Yeah. Right. So Jesus told the story of a rich man and a poor man. In the stories that Jesus told, he used things that were happening around him. He used things of the day, things that people were interested in, things, injustices that he was trying to correct. He used things that were happening. He used things that people were familiar with. In those days, there was a great divide between the rich and the poor. Well, even today, there's still a great divide between the rich and the poor. There always has been. Today, we see with the financial crisis, the Wall Street bankers and financiers, they have the big salaries and bonuses, and other people lost their homes and lost their mortgages and everything. So there's still a great divide. And the poor people around the world are only getting poorer now with this financial crisis. The rulers of the day, when Jesus was there, were rich, and they were well off, and they believed that it had something to do with their piety, their connection with God. They're doing right, that they are rich, and the poor people are doing wrong, so they're poor. That was the thinking of that day. And Jesus, in his stories, he tried to change this thinking. It was the leaders of the chosen people who had become hard of hearing. Therefore, Jesus' stories were carefully selected and carefully crafted to deal with those areas in which they needed correction and reproof. From the scripture reading, if you turn to Luke chapter 16 and verse 19. Let's look at it. Luke chapter 16. We're going to read 19, 20, and 21. Page 913. fine linen and live in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. Okay, let's stop there for a moment. Now Jesus is here showing the contrast between someone who was living in selfish luxury, and someone who was silently suffering in poverty, but he was a righteous man. I like how the King James Version puts it. The King James Version says, there was a man who fared sumptuously. I like those words. He fared sumptuously. That means he was well off. He was living in luxury. And contrast, very big contrast, there was a beggar at his gate, covered in sores. And it was so bad that even the dogs were around him, licking his sores. Also, it says that he was longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. He was waiting for the crumbs from the table. Now, this signifies a very low position. If you are under the table or around the table waiting for crumbs, or waiting for scraps, you're at the same level as the dogs, because that's where your dog usually is. Your dog is there waiting for something, tossing it to the dog. He's at the same level as the dogs, but then he's probably lower than the dogs because the dogs were licking his sores. Right? So it's a very big contrast. If you remember the story of the Syrophoenician woman, the Canaanite woman who came to Jesus and she said, "Lord, please heal my daughter." And Jesus said, it's not right to take the children's bread and cast it to the dogs. It's the same idea. It's not right to take the children's bread and cast it to the dogs. And she said, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs beg for crumbs from the master's table." It's the same theme. Let's go on, verse 22. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In hell, where he was in torment, he looked up and he saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire." Let's stop there. The beggar, being righteous, was taken to a symbolic heaven by Abraham's side. And the rich man, who obviously was found lacking in righteousness, was taken to a place of torment, a symbolic hell. What lesson can we learn from this? My grandmother always used to say, if an important person dies, like a president or a king or a queen, and you put that person's body out in the street, and a person who's not important also dies, and you put that person's body out in the street, and you leave both of the bodies unattended, they will both begin to smell and will decompose, right? So I said that to say this, that there's a time coming when the playing field will become level. It won't matter what your status is. If you're the pastor, it won't matter if you're the president of a company or the president of a country. We will all be judged by the same set of criteria. This rich man was judged and he was found wanting. Lazarus, on the other hand, was judged and he was found faithful in this story. Now there's a question. Why Abraham? Why did he look up and he said, "Father Abraham"? The prophets in those times were very important. In fact, they were revered. If you remember the story of the woman at the well, we all know that story very well. When she was at the well and Jesus came and said, "Give me some water," and she said, "Samaritans and Jews, we don't have any relationship, so why are you asking me?" And Jesus said, "If you knew who was asking you for water, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." And then she kind of took an attitude with Jesus, if you remember. She started saying, "Are you greater than our father Jacob?" So she started invoking the prophets, the patriarchs and the prophets, Abraham and Moses and Jacob. These people were important. She said to Jesus, "Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well, and he drank from it himself, and his sons, and his flocks?" It's like she was checking off a checklist, right? "Are you greater than our father Jacob?" and who drank from the well, right? And his sons also drank from it, and his flocks also drank from it, and his herds also drank from it. Are you greater than him? She gave the list, right? Because these people were revered. These people were very important. But Jesus said to her, I will give you living water. Right? So here in the story, the rich man cries, Father Abraham, please. And he asked Father Abraham. The leaders back then were denying that Jesus was God, but they revered Abraham and the prophets. And Jesus was appealing to this idea and these beliefs that they held, and that's why he used this story. Therefore, the rich man cried to Abraham, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. If you remember, when Jesus was teaching in the temple, Jesus was saying, I and the Father are one. And the people said, we have one Father. That's Abraham. Right. Again, this is the kind of thing that Jesus was fighting against. We have one Father. That's Abraham. I watched this. I watched the movie of John, the book of John. And the person's interpretation of this movie, that scene, some people were repairing the temple, so there was some wood and there were stones and rocks, bricks. And some people were talking, some people were doing other things, and Jesus was teaching. And some people were answering him while working. And Jesus said, I and the Father are one. And they said, we have one Father. That's Abraham. Then Jesus said, Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it, and he was glad. And at that point, somebody said, you are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham. And at that point, the people who were talking and who were buzzing around, they stopped. And everybody looked at Jesus. And in the movie, the music, stopped, and everything went silent. And he said, before Abraham was. And at that point, it became even more quiet. And everybody was like staring at him, as if they were thinking, he's not going to say that. like they could anticipate what he was going to say. But he's not going to say that, right? Tell me he's not going to say that. So everybody was quiet. And Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. And then the silence, everybody just erupted. Blasphemy! Blasphemy! And they took up the stones that were there to stone Jesus. So this is the kind of thinking that they had. Abraham is important. And they denied Jesus. So this is why Jesus is telling this story. The rich man cried to Father Abraham, have mercy on me. And an interesting part is that he asked Father Abraham to send Lazarus to do what? I can't hear you.
Relieve his suffering.
To relieve his suffering by doing what?
Tip of a little bit of water on his tongue.
Yes. He asked him to dip the tip of his finger and cool his tongue. By this we know that this story is just that. It's a story. It's not real. There are some people who argue that this story is actually true and this is what's going to happen and all that. This is a story. It's not anything that will happen like this, because there's nobody who's going down into hell and coming back anyway. When you go down into hell, you don't come back, right? The only person is Jesus has the keys of hell and of death. Only Jesus. Nobody else going down to hell to dip a finger of water and cool anybody's tongue. And even if you're in hell, a drop of water is not going to help you anyway. It is interesting also that the rich man, while he was alive, he allowed Lazarus to be at his gate begging him without licking him. But now, in his torment, he's asking the same Lazarus to go get some water for him. And it's interesting that he didn't ask for a cup of water. He asked for a drop of water. See, he had suddenly become humble. He wasn't asking for much. He's only asking for a small amount. Let's look at verse 25. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. 26. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. He said, and besides all this, a great chasm has been fixed. The King James Version says a great gulf has been fixed. There's a great divide, so that those who want to go from here to there cannot. It's a divide. You are there, and he's there. Stay where you are. In our lifetime, we have to choose which side of the great chasm, the great divide, the great gulf we want to be on. We have to choose while we're living. The rich man chose his side when he was alive. He had wealth and he lived in luxury, but not in righteousness. The poor man lived in poverty. He had a hard life, but he was righteous. Then the time came when the playing field was made level for everybody. And the rich man who fared sumptuously, as the King James Version puts it, while the dogs were licking Lazarus, this same man now wants Lazarus to help him. He chose his side long ago when he was alive. There's a proverb that says, if you make your bed, you must lie in it. So he made his bed when he was alive. So now he is lying in it. Lazarus also chose his side. Lazarus chose the side of humility, the side of righteousness, and it paid off. How about us? Now is the time for us to correct our past wrongs. This rich man is trying now when it's too late to correct what was wrong. He became humble, and he said, just bring a drop of water to cool my tongue. He didn't ask for a cup. Just a small drop, but it was too late. You cannot correct wrongs after it's too late, because when it's too late, it's just that. It's too late. Many of us here are already baptized members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church or of a church. So why this message about choosing sides when we've already chosen? Well, this is a reminder of the decision that we made a long time ago. Remember when you decided to become a baptized member of the church? Can't you remember? Some of us long, long ago. Can you remember how you felt? The feeling now must be different. The feeling changes as time goes on. Things happen. Sometimes some people get disillusioned. They leave church. They come back. They get tired. Lots of things change since the day that you become baptized. It's good to remember the old times. It's good to remember the day that you decided. My uncle, how I came to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. My uncle brought me to church when I was 10 years old. He was going to church. And I joined the church and I got baptized when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I started going to church and he stopped going to church. And that was a long time ago. I'm here now in Japan, and last year, March, I went home. And he came to the airport to pick me up. It's been a long time since he left church, many years since he left church. 30 years, I think, since he stopped going to church. When he picked me up at the airport, I got in the car, and I closed the door. And he looked at me and he said, I'm a deacon in the church. I was like, what, really? Right, so after 30 years, he came back. It's good to remember the day when how you were feeling at that time when you joined. When he said that, I remembered when he took me to church, and I remember when I got baptized the first time. I was reading about Zacchaeus this week. What do we know about Zacchaeus? What do we remember about Zacchaeus? Anybody?
He was a little guy.
He was a little guy. That's the first thing we remember about him. He was short, and we often imagine he was like this tall, right? But we don't know how tall he was.
That's true. He just couldn't see, so he climbed the tree.
Yeah, he could have been taller than me, but
That's right.
Yeah, the Bible said he was of little stature, but I don't know compared to what.
Compared to Goliath.
Yes, so he was short. Anything else you remember about Zacchaeus?
Rich.
He was rich.
Dishonest.
He was dishonest. Tax collector. He was a tax collector, that's his job. So a lot of the tax collectors back then were dishonest.
And he had a great desire to see the truth.
Yes.
The man standing there.
Curious. Yes, he was curious about, he had heard about Jesus, and he became curious. I had heard this story many times. Usually at church when I hear this story, this account of Zacchaeus, it's always something to laugh at. People usually talk about it and they laugh, oh, Zacchaeus was sharp, ha ha ha, you know, like that. And he climbed the sycamore tree, and it's always something funny. Even in the songs that we sing, you know, Zacchaeus, you know, he climbed the sycamore tree. People laugh at it. But for the first time this week, I was looking at this, and I was moved. Let's look at it. It's in Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19, verse. Let's start from verse 1. Page 916. Page 916. Luke chapter 19. Let's read it. Verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down and at once welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said, and this is the part that moved me. I never noticed this before. This verse right here. This is the part that moved me. Welcome, brother and sister. Verse 8. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay him back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham, the same Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and save what was lost. Now what moved me about this was, it's not easy to do that. It's not easy to stand up and say, I'm going to give half of what I have to the poor. How many of you are going to get up and give half of what you have to the poor right now?
I might as well join him.
You become poor. It's not easy. He was a wealthy man. He said, I'm going to give half of what I have to the poor. So he's going to become half as wealthy as he was. Right? And then he said, if I have cheated anybody, we don't know how many people he cheated. He said he's going to pay them back 4 times the amount. That's not easy either. Zacchaeus was going to lose a lot of money. I never noticed that before, because every time I read this or I heard the story, it said Zacchaeus was a sharp man, ha ha ha, you know, that kind of thing. But it's serious stuff. You know, it's not easy. Zacchaeus was converted, and because through his conversion, that's what he wanted to do. He said, I'm going to give half of what I have to the poor. You know, it reminds you of when you first become converted. One more thing I want to tell you. I'm going to finish soon because I don't speak very long. Zacchaeus chose the side of right, and he also chose the side of right doing. Now, in the book of Acts, Philip was sent by the angel to do something, to meet somebody. Do you remember who that was? Anybody? Anybody else other than Mark? Same answer, right? All right. Okay, yeah. Acts chapter 9. Let's go to Acts chapter 9. Acts chapter 9. Verse 20.
Chapter 8.
Yes, I've been doing that. When I was preparing this, I've been doing that. If it was chapter 8, I wrote chapter 9. If it was 16, I wrote 15. Right, Jermaine? Yeah. Because I told Jermaine 15 for the scripture reading and 16. And I wrote down 9, then it was 8. I think the Bible that I was using... I used 2 different Bibles. I don't know if they have different chapters. I don't know. Acts chapter 8.
Yes, sir.
Verse 26. I'll read. That's page 957. Verse 26. Philip and the Ethiopian. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, go south to the road, the desert road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. So he started out, and on his way he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official in charge of all the treasury of Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home was sitting in his chariot reading the book of Isaiah the prophet. The Spirit told Philip, go to that chariot and stay near it. Then Philip ran up to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet. Do you understand what you're reading? Philip asked. How can I, he said, unless someone explains it to me. So he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. Verse 32. The eunuch was reading this passage of scripture. He was led like a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before the shearer is silent, he did not open his mouth. In his humiliation he was deprived of justice. Who can speak of his descendants, for his life was taken from the earth? Verse 34. The eunuch asked Philip, tell me please, who is the prophet talking about, himself or someone else? Then Philip began with that very passage of scripture and told him the good news about Jesus. Now I like verse 36. As they traveled along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, look, here is water. Why shouldn't I be baptized? And he gave orders to stop the chariot. Then both Philip and the eunuch went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. That's the point I want to make. Verse 36. The eunuch said, I don't hear this very often. Usually it's somebody telling the other person, after he has explained it, he says, so what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to give your life to Jesus? Or are you going to... The eunuch said, hold on, look, there's some water. Why can't I be baptized? Right? He asked for it. Right? That was quite interesting. And I also felt moved by that. Conversion, again. If you remember when you were baptized, you remember the way you felt. This is the way the eunuch felt. He made his decision right there. He chose the side that he wanted to be on. He said, look, here's some water. Why can't I be baptized? And he was baptized. I am ready. And I am decided. So on that great judgment day, when the day comes and the playing field is made level, he wanted to be on the side of righteousness. He was also well off. He had a pretty high position. But he made a decision then. He made a decision for righteousness, which was different from the rich man in the story. There's a question that some people ask. We talk to people about choosing a side. You choose the side of righteousness. You join the church. Yes, people do that. And then after they get in the church, then they ask, how do I keep that feeling alive? Or how do I keep it alive? How do I keep the flame burning? After I'm here, how do I keep it going? How do I stay on the side of righteousness? How do I stay on the path that leads to everlasting life? There's a song that says, when all of my labors and trials are o'er, and I am safe on that beautiful shore, just to be near the dear Lord I adore, with through the ages be glory for me. But how do we make it? How do we keep the flame alive so that we can get to that point where we say, glory for me, I've made it? Well, to remember the building blocks, to remember the steps to Christ, to remember those things that we used to do before, spending time in prayer, spending time in Bible study, and studying God's Word. The responsive reading that we read today, Psalm 119, verse 9 to 16. If you can turn to it. Psalm 119. Page 535. Gives us an idea about how to do it. How to keep the flame alive. Now that you've chosen, how do you keep the flame alive? Sometimes years after, some people were baptized 20 years ago, 30 years ago. How do you keep it alive? Psalm 119, verse 9. How can a young man keep his way pure? By living according to your word. I seek you with all my heart. Do not let me stray from your commands. I have hidden your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you. Praise be to you, O Lord. Teach me your decrees. With my lips I recount all the laws that come from your mouth. I rejoice in following your statutes, as one rejoices in great riches. I meditate on your precepts and consider your ways. I delight in your decrees. I will not neglect your word. In closing, it is my prayer that we all will do these things so that when the time comes, when there's that great divide and there'll be us and them, there'll be people on the side of righteousness and there'll be people on the side of death. It is my prayer that we all will make it, that we all will keep the flame alive, and that we will make it on the right side, on the side of righteousness. Until then, I pray that our hearts will go on singing. Until then, I pray that with joy you will carry on the way that you've been carrying on. Until the day our eyes behold the city, until the day that God calls us home. Thank you.